Good morning. It's June 15th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. Federal Reserve's rate freeze. The central bank decides to leave interest rates unchanged at a range of 5% to 5.25%, but also signals that two more increases are likely this year. The U.S. Secretary of State will visit China this weekend for the first time since 2018. The high-stakes trip will come months after a meeting was postponed due to the Chinese spy balloon incident earlier this year. And starting today, the South Korean government will carry out a daily weekday briefing on the Fukushima wastewater as part of efforts to ease public concern ahead of Japan's release of decontaminated water this summer. The U.S. Fed has decided to pause its long series of rate hikes, but it's signaling this isn't the end, with the resilient U.S. economy slowing efforts to curb inflation. Our Moon Hae-ryun starts us off.
The U.S. central bank has kept its interest rates unchanged for the first time in 15 months, but says more rate hikes are likely before the end of the year. Following the Federal Monetary Open Committee's two-day meeting, it issued a unanimous statement on Wednesday that rate hikes would be paused at the 5 to 5.25% range while the economic situation is assessed. This freeze follows 10 consecutive rate hikes as the Fed aggressively responded to the worst inflation the United States has seen in 40 years.
Looking ahead, nearly all committee participants view it as likely that some further rate increases will be appropriate this year to bring inflation down to 2% over time.
Fed officials say that further hikes are likely to bring interest rates to the 5.5 to 5.75% range before the end of 2023. Despite more rate increases, Fed officials cast a more optimistic view of the economy, but say curbing inflation takes longer in a robust economy. The economic growth outlook for this year more than doubled to 1%, up from 0.4%, while the unemployment rate is projected to rise to 4.1%, which is lower than March's estimate of 4.5%. In May, the Consumer Price Index climbed 4% on year, which was the lowest annual rise in over 2 years. However, excluding volatile food and energy prices, the core inflation rate remained well above the Fed's target of 2%.
So I think if you look at core PCE inflation overall, look at it over the last 6 months, you're just not seeing a lot of progress. It's running at a level, over 4.5%, far above our target, and not really, moving down.
Personal consumption expenditure, which measures price changes of consumer goods and services, rose 4.4% on year in April. The Fed's earlier prediction back in March that PCE would see an on-year rise of 3.6% at the end of the year has been raised to 3.9% in reflection of the latest data. U.S. stocks pinballed following the announcement, with investors bracing for another interest hike later this year. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
America's top diplomat is set to visit China this weekend for the first time in nearly 5 years. The U.S. says the trip is to bring Washington-Beijing communication lines back on track. Our Lee Sin-ja has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was set to visit China to hold talks with his Chinese counterpart in February this year, only for the trip to be called off last minute after a Chinese spy balloon was shot down over U.S. territory. 4 months later, the top U.S. diplomat is now set to visit China for talks with high-ranking officials in Beijing from June 18th to 19th. The upcoming visit comes as Washington looks to normalize communication channels amid ongoing tension between the two countries, which also includes 2 military-related incidents in recent weeks. According to U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, Washington has 3 main objectives during his visit. During the talks, Blinken will look to establish communication channels that are open and empowered to discuss important challenges, address misperceptions, and prevent miscalculation. The spokesperson added that Blinken will also raise a range of issues on both regional and global matters, while also exploring potential cooperation on transnational challenges in areas such as climate and global macroeconomic stability. While Washington does not believe this visit will result in any major breakthroughs, the main goal is to prevent any potential conflict. With the visit to Beijing, Blinken will be the first U.S. cabinet official to travel to China under the Biden administration and the first from any government since 2019. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Starting Thursday, the South Korean government will hold a daily weekday briefing on the release of the Fukushima wastewater. According to the Office for Government Policy Coordination, details of the daily briefing will be announced at the Seoul government complex this morning. It added that it will also discuss seafood safety management. The decision comes as Japan is quickly moving to release the contaminated water into the ocean, with the South Korean government looking to quell rising public concerns. And the questioning over the Fukushima wastewater continued on the last day of the interpellation session here in South Korea. Policies for the marginalized, like those with disabilities, also topped Wednesday's session. Lee Si-hoo reports.
Rival lawmakers grilled government officials on issues directly pertaining to South Koreans' lives, and among them was the People Power Party's Kim Ye-ji.
A person with a disability myself and also a list member. I'm going to ask questions on the government's role and direction regarding policies for the disabled.
Kim asked Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, representing the government at the parliamentary session, about the Yoon administration's direction and plans for policies for the disabled.
We are working hard to increase the related budget. We are also working on expanding support for the disabled's health, care, and personal budget system. We will actively communicate with those with disabilities to carry out our assignments and develop various policy alternatives.
And as was the case in the previous two sessions of questioning, another hot topic was Japan's plan to release wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant.
Japan has chosen the cheapest and easiest way to make up for the nuclear plant disaster. I think this will set a bad example globally. What do you think?
If it's done in a non-scientific way that harms the people around the world, there are international systems to discuss and file complaints, for example, through the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea.
Other questions asked involved the government's aftercare for those affected by the Itaewon tragedy late last year and the need for the protection of press freedom. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
The U.S. Fed has frozen key interest rates after 10 consecutive hikes. But the central bank says 2 more rounds of increases are likely before the end of 2023. For more, we're joined by Professor Kim Hwa-gyun this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Sure. Why did the U.S. central bank decide to freeze the rates this time around? I mean, what's your take on the Fed's latest decision, Professor?
Well, according to the Fed Watch before the meeting, the chance of the rate, the not increasing was around 90%. So clearly, the Fed signaled enough after some releases of the data, macro data, including inflation, that the Fed is going to either freeze, but they're not going to decrease the interest rate at this stage. So it was more like an expected event. But at the same time, the banking sector instability, especially in the U.S. regional banks, was a concern. So the U.S. The economy basically is expecting a little bit of like a pause, or even like the rate decrease at this point a bit.
Right, widely anticipated and also expected pause at the moment. But the thing is, concerns and anxieties in the financial sector are yet to be tamed after the recent turmoil in the banking system in the U.S., right? Is that also
That's
another
right.
reason that the Fed decided to pause the rate hike cycle?
Yes, I think so. So clearly about 2-3 months ago, we saw some bank failures in small-sized banks, but it's not too small, but I think it's some regional banks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a big problem in the U.S. big banking system because it's pretty stable, such as Chase or other big banks. But in terms of smaller banks, because they hold a lot of treasury as their assets as both balance sheet activities, as the interest rate going up, then their asset value decreases, and that actually causes some bank runs. So the government and also the Fed especially wants to see some improvements in the banking system by the interest rate pause. But at the same time, they know that they have to control the inflation. So they want to see if the inflation data is coming out more favorably so that they can use this pause to see some, earn some time until they see some improvements in the banking system.
Right, the trouble of the rather smaller regional banks, still it was threatening enough to make investors kind of anxious, right?
Yes, I agree, right.
Then what's the chance of seeing a rate cut before the end of 2023? I mean, could Wednesday's rate freeze be followed by a rate hike? Because the Fed hinted 2 more rate hikes.
Mm-hmm. The dot plot, the Fed dot plot that shows the scatter plots of the Fed officials' decisions clearly seem to be going a bit more hawkish than the March meeting. But according to FedWatch, which is the futures data version of the probability of the rate increase, is about 60% range. I don't know how quickly this is going to change 90% by July, but at this stage, there's some small chance of the rate decrease if the inflation data becomes really favorable. But at this stage, more increase, I think, is more likely.
Right, a rather hawkish pause at the moment. Let's talk about the consumer prices that came out yesterday that showed the smallest annual rise in over 2 years. Now, that's a good sign, right? But still, some experts are saying that it's maybe too early to say the inflation is under control. How do you read those figures?
Right. When you look at the small numbers of each item, the core inflation without the food and energy still is high, and that's also what Mr. Powell said. Among these items, then which item was the most concerning part? It was more like a rent and housing cost. So that was around like 8 to 8.7 or 8%. So depending on which one is, but it was pretty high. So, and that's the kind of concerning part. What is a bit puzzling though, usually if this is the problem, the rent, if you increase the interest rate, the rent is also likely to increase, which will worsen the inflation. So it was somewhat puzzling to me that if the rent is the real concern according to the data, then I'm not sure if the raising interest rate is going to resolve this issue. But let's see how things go in the future for the next few months. And if the rent actually is going down, which is the big part of the PCE and also CPI, then I think there's a chance that even the small rate decrease can happen toward the end of the year. But still, we expect probably 5.5 to 5.75 is going to be the average consensus for the end of this year.
Right. We're halfway into the year, so 6 more months to come, but maybe 2 more rate hikes by the end of the year. But how would you expect the next policy meeting to be? Do you expect a rate hike or rate freeze or even a drop maybe?
It's going to be highly uncertain. So the data release is going to be critical. So there will be a lot of interactions between the media and also the signaling from the markets and also the Fed. Right. And my expectation is that 25 basis point increase, but there's some non-trivial chance that another pause, actually.
All right, Professor Kim Ha-gyun, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Every year, cultural leaders around the world seek and explore ways to promote cultural exchanges and communication. This year, such a forum took place at the residence of the French ambassador here in Seoul. Our Choi Soo-hyung was at the Cultural Communication Forum.
Hidden talent, the joy of sharing. The Korea Image Communication Institute held its annual Culture Communication Forum on Tuesday night. The event was held at French ambassador's residence and was attended by ambassadors and cultural leaders from countries such as Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. Philippe Lefort, the French ambassador to Korea, demonstrated his taekwondo skills. He started taekwondo when he came to Korea so that he could see the spiritual soul of the country. At the forum, he performed his top 3 favorite forms, Taeguk 7, Taeguk 8, and Kumgang.
So I've been practicing fencing, French boxing, another French, not that much well-known sport, and I've been practicing also karate and today taekwondo.
Another guest was someone who had become deeply immersed in the essence of Korea's traditional pansori music and has chosen to leave behind their life in France to pursue the path of sorikgun or pansori vocalists.
I was attracted to pansori at the Korean Cultural Center in 2016. As I continue to do it, it feels like therapy to help me heal my heart.
The German ambassador played Chopin's Nocturne No. 20, which he said always gives him unbelievable moments. A magician, Edward Guan, performed his magic tricks for the crowd. The chairman of CICI said she hopes more people can share their love of Korean culture with the world.
It is a universal wish to live a long life with a young heart. To do so, I believe it is essential to be positive, communicate well, and share with others. That is why we prepared the hidden talent today.
The CICI's annual forum aims to become a cultural stepping stone between Korea and the world. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
1 in 4 families in South Korea has a pet. Not only are their pets cute and loving, but they have also become actual family members, which is why services for them have become more available, like this doggy school our Kim Jong-sil went to.
Welcome to a kindergarten for dogs. From 9 a.m. till noon, all dogs of different shapes and sizes come in to spend another day. One of the largest kindergartens for dogs here in South Korea, this place offers various activities conducted by trainers and medical assistants from professional vets.
More than 130 dogs come to this kindergarten for daycare, exercise, and other activities. It might not be cheap, but customers say it's worth it.
Leia is my beloved daughter and my best friend who understands me better than anyone. We are very satisfied with the training she gets here in terms of socializing and etiquette.
The kindergarten principal said he has seen many changes in pet culture over the past few decades.
In the past, people used to buy puppies impulsively and abandon them if they didn't behave. But nowadays, more and more people adopt them as part of their family.
I consider my dog as a family member for life, so I want to give them the best possible care, just as I did to my children and my grandchildren if I have some in the future.
According to this year's Korea Companion Animal Report by KB Financial Group, 81.6% of owners said they consider their pets as family members. The report also said pet owners spend an average of $120 per month. That's more than $1,400 per year.
The overall cost of raising a pet has increased, starting with adoption, nurturing, and medical treatment. There's also huge room for funeral costs to grow in the future. All of this spending is due to the fact that many people deem pets as part of their family.
However, in South Korea, pets are still considered property according to the law. Experts said changes might be necessary as they are becoming a bigger part of many people's lives. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Belarus, where President Alexander Lukashenko on Wednesday said the country has begun accepting the delivery of Russian tactical nuclear weapons. Now, the weapons are short-range and less powerful than strategic nuclear weapons and could potentially be used on the battlefield. The delivery marks the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union that Russia has moved such weapons outside of its borders. They will be stored in Belarusian nuclear storage facilities. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has justified the move, pointing at European countries that host U.S. nuclear weapons. Lukashenko also noted that Belarus would not hesitate to use the weapons if it experiences aggression. Russia, meanwhile, has maintained that it will retain control of the weapons. Now to Greece, where at least 79 people have died and hundreds more are missing after an overloaded boat carrying migrants capsized off the country's south coast. Over 100 others have been rescued. The boat was spotted on Tuesday in international waters. According to the local Coast Guard, the boat refused help, possibly due to fears over Greek practices pushing migrants back. A few hours later, it capsized. The boat was bound for Italy from Libya and was carrying mostly men in their 20s. Survivors say that most women and children who had been on the ship died. They had been further inside the boat at the time of the capsize. It's speculated that some 400 to more than 700 people were aboard the 20 to 30 meter long vessel. Now, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees on Wednesday said that a record 110 million people around the world have been forcibly displaced from their homes. According to the UN Refugee Agency, the war in Ukraine, conflict in Sudan and refugees fleeing Afghanistan has pushed the number to a new high. 62.5 million were displaced within their own countries, while 35.3 million were refugees fleeing abroad. It's feared that the figure will increase further, as the agency's chief said global emergencies had increased as much as fourfold in recent years. The number of displaced people was 108 million at the end of last year. Forcible displacement usually occurs as a result of persecution, conflict, or human rights violations. And finally, a letter penned by classical composer Mozart over drama in his love life could fetch between $300,000 and $600,000 US when it goes under the hammer in July in an auction hosted by Sotheby's in London. Now, the two-page letter was written in the summer of 1782, when Mozart was 26 years old. It shows the Austrian composer asking a friend for advice over a misunderstanding he had with his future mother-in-law. Mozart was reportedly worried that she would send the police to take his fiancée away and ruin his reputation. Fortunately, the couple got married shortly after the letter was written. They stayed together until Mozart's death at the age of 35. While Mozart is known to have written many letters, it's rare to see them go to auction.
Good morning. I have been telling you the same weather information for the past few days, passing rain with thunderstorms, and it's another repeat for today. Scattered storms could bring hail to some parts of the country with up to 60 millimeters of rain in the forecast, so you could get soaked once it starts to rain, so please keep a small umbrella handy. Temperatures should gradually warm up as we head into the weekend, and by Sunday we'll be seeing scorching highs of 32 degrees here in Seoul. Morning temperatures are similar to yesterday, while inland regions are having foggy conditions. Highs will then go up to 28 degrees in Seoul, which is about 3 degrees higher than yesterday. Air quality will be decent nationwide, but the ozone level and UV rays will be high during the day today. Tons of sunshine will be in effect for much of Korea from tomorrow. Meanwhile, Jeju Island will see rain early next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Next, a newscast coming up at 12 p.m. Korea time.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. World Expo 2030, Busan, Korea.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Good Morning Seoul.
And we're broadcasting to you live from Seoul, South Korea. This is where you can get
interactive radio that you can watch and listen to. Enjoy Radio Clock with me.
Connecting Korea and the world, Arirang Radio. It's our 20th anniversary of our station. For you, wherever you may be, and for 20 years like a friend, as a messenger, and as a partner. We have shared countless happy memories, and this might just be another beginning. As you've done for the past 20 years, and for the next 20 to come, join us on Arirang Radio. Always Korea, always Arirang Radio.
Experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Year. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
bring a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 15th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee. Good morning. And Cheska Dainong.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Happy Thursday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Recently, a mother who went to Guam 7 months into her pregnancy unexpectedly gave birth to her child prematurely. Because there was no neonatal specialist there, she spent a nerve-wracking 6 weeks reaching out to doctors here in Korea. Eventually, she got a hold of those at Suncheonhyang University Bucheon Hospital in Korea who brought the newborn back home safe. Speaking of newborns, it's not that easy for many workers to start planning for a family here in Korea. That explains how we have the lowest birth rates in the world. To tackle this, Incheon Tourism Organization has come up with an innovative idea. It will give out special promotions to employees who have their third child while working at the company. It's the first company to come up with this type of welfare policy. And moving on, last summer, dozens died from the heavy rain swamping Seoul streets. To prevent anything like this from happening again, just weeks ahead of what could be yet another record monsoon season, some residents in Seoul have volunteered to clear out trash from the roads and sewers. Now, this is to make sure that even if we do see a lot of rain, the water will drain out. Seoul City will be holding these volunteer sessions until the end of August. Now, if we take a closer look at the third news item, most of this cleaning up volunteer work happened in the capital. Volunteers actually collected a lot of used cigarette butts and trash from sewers, and here's what one of them had to say about her experience.
I found a lot of trash piled up near restaurants and bars. A lot of dirt was clogged up in gaps between the roads. It made me think without volunteers like myself who cleaned this up, it would have been really dangerous again this monsoon season.
And Cheska, when I first saw this story, I was relieved because I remember how much rain we saw, and it's nice to see that these volunteers would go out and clear out the streets. What about you?
Absolutely, and I think we all remember how torrential the rain was last year, and I remember I loved biking, and it would flood the Han River to a point where it was completely inaccessible. So the fact that we have this global citizens that are willing to do, roll up their sleeves and do what is needed to do to clog up the street is wonderful. But I think it also raises a very important environmental issue.
For sure.
Because I don't want their efforts to be in vain, that we really need strict regulations and penalties for littering. There are so many signs for no cigarette butts near restaurants or sewers, but we see them clogged every time. And just yesterday, I see people just tossing their cigarette butts on the street. So I think this also highlights a very important issue that needs to be addressed.
And during our rehearsal, you mentioned how last year when we saw the torrential downpour of rain in Han River, when the water levels came up, you said you could see so much trash there.
Exactly, because the plastics and the trash would float and then you could see all the buried trash just coming up to the surface because of the rain.
Because I was quite surprised. I thought we were living in a relatively clean city, but it wasn't the case. So I realized never litter and make sure if there is litter, pick it up. And seeing Seoul residents roll up their sleeves and volunteer to pick up trash and clear out these roads ahead of monsoon season made me reconsider how developed our country's civic consciousness is. I thought it was really noble of them. So Chi-hee, what did you think? And also, do you have any experience doing any volunteer work or community service before?
Well, like you said, I think the level of civic consciousness shown by our citizens was really high, and I was really impressed at how they were willing to take this initiative to clean up all the litter, because like you said, you've seen it all floating up during the flood last year. Yes, I thought it was really impressive. And I myself, I have experience when I was younger. I was cleaning up the litter in my neighborhood as well, just voluntarily. And I guess I just wanted to get praised for helping out with the community. And I make monthly donations.
That's really nice.
And I also make one-time donations as well. For example, last year, for those who had to go through restoration because of the torrential rain, I made a one-time donation. And not so much an active community service, but I guess these days I do more donations rather than engaging in these activities.
And I hope that it definitely motivated me, and it encourages other viewers out there to also rethink about what they can do for the community. And that was our news feed for this Thursday. Let's move on to today's discussion topic. Every June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. It's a day that is especially important for Korea as we're expecting to become the world's most aged country in a few years' time. Take a look at the screen to find out more. Super aged society. This is when 20% of the total population are 65 or older. South Korea is expected to become one in 2025. Naturally, more officials and companies are trying to find out what the aging population needs and how they would like to spend their senior years, mainly by expanding job opportunities and enhancing senior care centers. But at the same time, we're also still seeing elder abuse cases hit the headlines. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. How far has South Korea come with its senior welfare policies? Is it enough for a country heading into a super-aged society? 2. Why should the young generation pay close attention to what's happening or what should be done for seniors? 3. How would our generation like to spend their senior years in the future? Today is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, where we aim to prevent violence against older people. And here at the studio, Cheska, why don't you tell us a bit more about how this day came to be?
So it is June 15th today, and it is designated by the United Nations, and the color theme is purple.
No wonder we're wearing purple.
We're very purple today. But this is a very, very serious issue because there are multiple types of abuses that can happen to the elder, and a lot of them is started from neglect and even psychological, social, and even sexual abuse that goes widely underreported. And by 2030, the United Nations has forecasted that the number of people aged over 60 would outnumber the youth, which for our generation would become a very significant issue that we address it and talk about it.
And see, that's why in light of this day, we want to talk about how specifically our generation perceives seniors these days. Are there any surveys in regards to this matter?
Well, in fact, a research organization conducted the Korea Generation Consciousness Survey and found that over 78% of those in their 30s said that the perception of the elderly in our country is very negative, not very positive. And this is mainly because our generation sees fairness as an important value and believe that the older generation, they were able to reap benefit from the period when Korea was going through rapid development. They were able to gain lots of money through real estate investment as well, which is not something we are able to do during this period of time, right? And there's also the issue of the national pension system. Yes, because they say once we get older, we won't be able to get the pension that the elderly are receiving right now.
Very important.
And this is also an issue of fairness as well, right?
Equality and fairness, for sure.
Exactly. And there was another survey seeing whether the 20s and 30s in the country were satisfied with the system for the elderly in South Korea. And it showed that nearly 50% of the respondents, as you see on the screen, were dissatisfied with the current welfare programs that was provided by the government. And other than this, though, I think the biggest problem is our generation's empathy, because although the proportion of the elderly people is continuously increasing and the issue of lonely deaths is also a huge social problem, it's really related to us as well, because they could be our parents. We grow older too, so I think we should pay more attention as well.
But the sad fact is, we really don't. I feel like, as you mentioned, as we saw through the survey, a lot of people in our generation seem to be apathetic because they don't think it's a problem that directly affects them at the moment. But I do think that, as you mentioned before, Chihi, a lot of our generation does seem to have conflicts with senior citizens. They seem to think that it's unfair that they're getting some economic benefits while we don't. But could you elaborate on why our generation has these conflicts and also why they don't really want to age specifically here in Korea?
I mean, just to give you a generalized form, and as Chihi mentioned, I think the MC fall into 2 very different categories. One, you grew up with your elders, so you understand them and you kind of see yourself through them because you kind of grow with them together. Or you are completely indifferent, a little bit apathetic, and sometimes a little frustrated, I would even say, by the inequality or the fairness that is happening at the moment, which when it gets serious, I think becomes a root cause for elder abuse in the future. So I think this is a very important issue for our generation to address, because there's a growing acceleration of economic gap and the generation gap that just seems to get wider and wider. And just a couple of days ago, I had a bus driver who yelled at my foreigner friend. I was extremely upset, so I went to my grandma and said, "Grandma, can you believe this happened?" She actually sat me down and said, girl, we never grew up with seeing any foreigner around, and the only exposure that we got was through political propaganda. And it actually made me realize, take a step back and say, this is the generation that we're living in. We're so far ahead, and the generation gap is only going to widen.
Because we have different experiences, upraisings, and also, as you mentioned, different socioeconomic situations from what our previous generation been through. Now, before we go on, we're also going to find out what our viewers think about getting old and whether they're preparing themselves for life after retirement. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. So Dan Quentin James said, I retired at the age of 65 in the United States. I prepared 25 years before I retired from a large U.S. company which had a 401k plan. Hussein Demir 5909 said, I started saving as soon as I started to work, but I'm not expecting to retire comfortably, just trying not to starve. Now, this is very relatable.
You go.
Exactly. You go, Hussein. How 849 said, invest in yourself and allocate assets for the future. It sounds easier than it is. Never stop learning financially and grow. These are all very solid statements here, and
very
also
future-driven.
Exactly, very future-driven. Then I'd like to ask you guys here in the studio how you're preparing for retirement when it comes to you becoming a senior citizen, starting with Shihi.
Well, personally, I'm saving up.
Really? That's good.
Another future-driven person.
Another future-driven person here in the
Not
studio.
too much, but you know, I'm not using all the money that I'm earning right now, and I'm investing in stock just a little bit. And in the future, I hope to invest in the real estate when I get to save up more money, I guess. But in general, the millennials, they are saving up there in the stock and real estate as well. And most cited that, in fact, this was through a survey. They said they're investing in stock and saving and real estate as well. But it's more for the 30s, those in their 30s, because of course they have more money.
Affordability,
yeah, affordability. And also those in their 30s, other aspects include like Hao said, investing in yourself for your self-development, staying healthy, and also trying to find a spouse who can live with you for the rest of your life. This is also, I guess,
very important.
It is important because, like I said earlier, lonely deaths are a huge social problem as well. So I think these are pretty decent ways of the millennials trying to prepare for their retirement. But many also said that they're not really prepared or are thinking of preparing for retirement. This was extreme for the 20s and 30s. 1 out of 3 people in their 30s were saying they're not preparing for their retirement at all. And those in their 20s were also saying the same. 1 out of 5 were saying that. So I guess compared to other generations, the younger generations, the millennials, some are saving up, preparing, some are just
Some are
not
future-driven, but some are living YOLO. I think it's
YOLO,
all, you only live once, but maybe just spend this day to the fullest, and I'm happy with that. But what about you, Cheska? Could you give us your 10 cents on how you're trying to prepare for this senior life?
I have a very interesting one that I would like to share. Okay. All of my friends in our 20s are already thinking about investing in silver towns.
Already?
Already.
That's way too future-driven.
We actually sit down and think about which city we should live in, which community we should live in, how our houses would have a bridge so we can have like house parties together.
So building your own little silver town.
Exactly, or like finding those silver towns that are being developed. But I think this highlights a very important thing that happens in our generation, which is that one, as we mentioned a lot here in the studio, the fertility rate is extremely low.
It is.
A lot of people are not having children or choosing singlehood. Therefore, we are responsible for ourselves and taking care of our not only financial but social protection.
Right.
So this community building activities or investing becomes a priority for a lot of the millennials, even in their 20s. And if we compare it with the Northern European countries with high social welfare, where they even have like 3-tier pensions. Yeah, 3-tier pensions, or even have like community building activities. The rate of loneliness or solitude that is reported in Germany is only 4%, which is very different from what is happening in South Korea.
Which makes me think, I think we should go around the world and compare all these senior welfare programs just to find out which place is the best to retire.
And choose where to live.
Exactly. And we actually have a live interview prepared with the millennial who's doing just that. So please wait, take a look at the screen to find out what she has to say. We're going to be hearing from another millennial who's moved around the world looking for the best place to raise her kids and eventually retire. She's originally from Hong Kong, but has also lived in Norway and the UK, and she's planning to immigrate to Scotland this summer, but at the moment she's living in Seoul. It's Peggy Lai. Welcome, Peggy.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, Peggy, so you've lived in so many different parts of the world, but you've lived the most in Hong Kong. So could you please compare South Korea's senior welfare policies to those of Hong Kong?
You know, to my surprise, they're quite similar. You know, like the free public transportations, or it's discounted one in Hong Kong for seniors, and the national pension system, you know. But I would say, like in Hong Kong, we have like individuals plans. You get to choose your investments for your pensions instead of relying on the government. So in that sense, each individual has a slightly different turnout in terms of the standard pension system. But then even though like each company has their own benefits for the workers, I would have to say like government officials or like teachers, they have more advanced benefits in terms of pension plans. And since Hong Kong has like free medical in general, so you don't really have to pay any monthly fee like in Korea, but then the wait is quite long. So the government realized about this, so they're giving out like some private sector coupons, medical coupons for seniors each year, like 12 times a year, so they can actually get a more, you know, speedy medical care in private medical centers. And in Hong Kong, there's this very special system. We call it like the fruit money. So regardless of your social and economical status, you get a monthly allowance of 240,000 won from the government once you turn 70. Okay. So there are also public housings, you know, for senior citizens, and, you know, they're very inexpensive, but again, the wait is very long. So I gotta say, many citizens who live around poverty line, they're struggling to survive, and the aids from the government is quite limited.
I see.
Yeah, I think some of the policies are pretty much similar to our country, but some we can definitely benchmark. And earlier, I'm sure you've seen that through our survey, we found out the millennials aren't very satisfied with the current welfare programs provided by the government. Would you say Hong Kong citizens have a positive outlook on its senior welfare programs?
You know, it's not impossible to live a basic life with the national pension in Hong Kong for most people, but like in Korea, the amount you get each month is quite limited. So in a city where the living standard is as high as in Hong Kong, people really rely on private pension schemes or investments. Like, you know, you're investing in stock markets, right? And for the rest, you know, I have to say they need to work. Keep on working until probably the day, you know, they pass. So in many ways, like it's quite similar to that in Korea, but unlike some European countries, when it comes to retirement plan, we're not just talking about, you know, a monthly allowance, but there's so many all-rounded facilities. You know, they really care for your physical health and your like psychological health per se. So I would have to say, you know, in general, like Hong Kong or in Korea, because, you know, for an Asian countries, like we lack the views on sustaining a standard of living for senior citizens who cannot pay the high price to get proper care, like the Silver Town, per se. So in that way, I can see that there are plenty of room for improvements in both Hong Kong and Korea, especially when the life expectancy in both regions are high. You know, people who live past 80 do need extra care in their day-to-day life, and the government participation is anticipated.
Jessica?
You know, Peggy, before talking to you, I thought I was pretty international, but you are a true global citizen. I mean, having been in so many places, you're now choosing Scotland to raise your children. I would love to hear why.
I lived in Norway before, and I was really impressed with their retirement plan. Like I had a grandmother there who had a really comfortable and well cared for life, you know, after she retired and she was single. But when it comes to like retiring in Korea or in Hong Kong, I don't see that kind of benefits. But living standard in Norway is quite high, and for Hong Kong citizen, the possibility of moving to UK is quite easy these days. So I checked all the benefits and talked to many friends of mine, from the UK, and they're actually really satisfied with how the government, have planned for the senior citizens. And, for me right now, I'm not paying most attention to my own retirement plan, but for my child's, upbringing. But in general, I would say, in UK, they do have quite a good sustainability for senior citizens, and in Germany, the satisfaction rate is quite high. And even though I didn't look into it, in detail, but in Scotland, I would say, it's quite all-rounded, and I'm quite satisfied.
That's great. That's great to hear, Peggy. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Due to time, we can't hear more, but thank you so much. And we definitely learned a lot from Peggy. It's really interesting to see how she compared different countries' policies to ours. And I remember last year I made my Silvers the new Gold series, and then at the time I found out South Korea has been pouring a lot of money and effort into improving our infrastructure for seniors. The biggest takeaway is that the health ministry has been trying to expand the job market for seniors. Last year alone, they created 845,000 job opportunities. Most, of course, were in the social and public sector. And what I was really happy to hear was that they felt more alive due to these opportunities.
Being productive.
Exactly. Could you elaborate on what South Korea is doing for seniors these days?
Well, like other countries, the government is putting in much effort to make lives better for the elderly people. And there are some welfare programs for the elderly, as well as the silver towns provided for these people. And the other day, I was able to interpret for Paju City's City Hall, and they had this new program that they've recently launched. And it was this TV-related program where they would monitor the television watching trend of the people, elderly people who are living alone. So you'd be able to monitor their pattern and figure out if they are okay, doing okay alone.
Wow.
Yes, and they would also figure out if they have dementia. It helps to diagnose dementia at an early stage. So little efforts like this on the local government level, I think, are also really helpful, not just the central government, but little efforts in the end will eventually build up to make a better society for the elderly.
Definitely. It's these small efforts and little changes in our local governments that pile up and eventually raise our awareness on what we need to do to better prepare and age in countries like South Korea. And that's all we have for you today. We'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.